quickly. I hope you're all suitably refreshed. Somebody did point out that it looked like wine, but it was apple juice in there, I'm told. So I hope everyone's going to stay awake. We have great pleasure in introducing our next speaker, Dr. Ali Parsa. Some of you may recognise Ali. He's a very vocal and high-profile advocate of alternative ways of providing healthcare and the involvement of the private sector in healthcare. So I think Ali's probably on speed dial with Newsnight most weeks. And he's been recognised for his contribution to healthcare as being one of the 100 most powerful people in healthcare by the HSJ survey last year. I'm glad you're here before Nigel Edwards, because I didn't want to get into some sort of war about who's higher in the league table, because I can't remember. But I'm really pleased to have Ali here, who I think brings a very different perspective perhaps to our first speaker, Amit, this morning. And we'll discuss the role of private providers and the potential for collaboration with the pharmaceutical and medtech industries as well. So, Ali, over to you.
Good morning. I usually apologize when I start for standing behind the podium because I'm so short. I guess most of you won't even be able to see me. And because I'm so short, I will never be a match for Nigel or anybody else in the power league of the NHS, which I never understood. I'm now almost 50. And when I was born, your destiny, now that I look at it with the benefit of hindsight, you could see that your destiny was almost decided by the microeconomics of your family, by the macroeconomics of which side of Berlin Wall you were born at. If I was born in in communist Russia or in Mao's China, I was going to do substantially worse than if I was born in the West. Bill Gates used to say that a genius in Mumbai did fundamentally worse than an average mediocre person born in Baltimore. That word has now changed. I look at my children, and I got 3 very young children, and I ask that question, that what is it that they're going to look at when they're 50 and say, what was the big macroeconomic trend that decided my destiny in the country in which I was born? And I think the answer to that question, to a large degree, is where does Britain sit, our country sit, our region sit in the global trade? And if you look at that way, we're not doing very well. In the last 20 to 30 years, when I came to Britain about almost 30 years ago, I came to a country that was top 5 most prosperous country in the world. Last year, according to the United Nations Prosperity League, we ranked 28. That is 1 point ahead of Greece. Now, I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm always optimistic about life. And I think that while it's important to look at the harsh realities of life, but it's also important to look at the bright side. And the bright side of this, if you want, is that we were doing exactly the same in sport. If I was organized enough to do PowerPoints and show you slides, I would have a slide that shows British performance in sports and in the Olympics versus our performance economically globally. And you would have seen that line almost follow each other very closely up to 1996. In 1996, Team GB entered the Olympics, won a single gold, 10 medals, came 36. People came back, UK sports was formed, and there was a clear determination not to think wishfully, but strategically, how do we change our sport performance? We focused in sports where Britain had a sporting chance to lead the world and be on the podium. People say we've done phenomenally well on any sport that you sit on. While that is true that we've done very well on bicycles and on sailings and rowing and everything else, part of it is because all of those things required equipments in which we were very good at producing or engineering, or it required the kind of cash that some other countries wouldn't have had. We were very strategic at what we did. And look at the results. By 2004, we were very soon on the top 10. By 2008, we came 4th. This year, we were 3rd. Never before in history, any country has got as many medals as we have got per capita. I know we didn't come 1st or 2nd, but those were countries who have 10 to 20 times more population than we do. So what can UK PLC learn from Team GB? And I think the lessons are very clear. First and foremost, we need to stop being wishful, thinking that we can become a global powerhouse in manufacturing, for instance. I hope we can, but I wouldn't make that plan A. Competing with the Germans in their technical aptitude and in the scale of the end-to-end supply chain they have in manufacturing, or with the Chinese on their elasticity of labor force, is going to be tough. But we are already on the podium on a number of areas. We are fantastic at professional services, at research, at development. In investment banking, I know we are bashing it like there is no tomorrow, but it's an area we lead the world in law, in management consultancy. And all of those areas are bringing a lot into UK. They're just not bringing enough. So what else is it that we could do world leaders on? And healthcare and education, in my view, is absolutely an area we should do very well at. It's very easy for Angola, for the rest of the world, developing countries to extract oil, create a lot of wealth. It takes a gigantic amount of time to then turn that into universities that can create nurses and doctors and build hospitals and deliver that. Why can Britain not have global hospital companies, healthcare companies, and you are all in global businesses, for those of you who are in pharmaceutical global companies, who sell to the world the way the Vodafones and the Tescos of the world do, and bring more into this country. So first, but secondly, we need to also start stopping thinking about our comfort zone and getting out of our comfort zone. When I was going to university, and when I see a lot of our political leaders and captains of industry, they're almost kind of all, give or take, the same age or generation as I am. When we all went to university, our forming years was formed at the time that developing countries just didn't matter. They were 10% of the world GDP, most of the world debt. You just focus on the other 90%. 10 years ago, they were 20% of the world GDP. Today, they're 43% of the world GDP. By the end of this decade, they will be most of the world GDP. They're 80% of the world world growth. How stupid is it then that Britain does more trade with Ireland than with Russia, China, Brazil, and India put together? Thirdly, if we want to sell healthcare to the world, we need to start inventing the kind of healthcare or education that the world needs rather than the ones we can hardly afford ourselves. We need to fundamentally re-engineer the model of healthcare we have. The other day, I was lucky enough to speak to an event that I can only describe as mad in Dubai. And only in a way, whether you like that country or hate it or whatever, but it's only in the way that they can. They have brought together 5,000 people from across the region, Central Asia, Middle East, Africa, to buy healthcare. There were 4 or 5 people from the West, and I guess I was privileged enough to be ugly enough and short enough to be invited. And there was about 50 people from the East, Thailand, China, India, Singapore. That part of the world has already decided where they're going to buy their healthcare from. And I saw that, and you ask why, well, I tell you why. In America, for instance, we do cataracts. Johns Hopkins does cataracts at $2,000 a go. We in Britain do it at $1,000 a go. Aravand in India does it at $50. They haven't cut us by 5%, 10%, 20%. They cut us by 95% in price. And for those who say, yes, but that's rubbish, nobody would use their cataract or their lenses or whatever it is they do, well, audited results says qualitatively they're as good as anything we do. I grew on the streets of Tehran in Iran, and in the 60s and 70s, every car in Iran was a Western car. And late 70s, early 80s, you could see the death of British and the Western manufacturing on the streets of Tehran. Every car got replaced by a Japanese car. At some stage, during the 70s, early 80s, the balance of equation, the economic value, which is quality over price, tilted to that end. And people left their inhibitions and bought the Japanese cars. And once they did, they bought it en masse. So look at that value equation in healthcare. We used to spend 1% of our GDP in healthcare when we created the National Health Service. By the 60s, we were spending 2%, by the 70s, 3%, by the 80s, 4 or 5%, by the 90s, 6 or 7%. Today, we spend 9% of our GDP on healthcare. The Americans are spending 16 to 18%, depending on which number do you believe. And my good, very well-paid friends in McKinsey tell me if we carry on the way we do, by 2050, we will spend 40% of our GDP in healthcare. That's just not going to happen. It's just fundamentally unsustainable. We are now all participants in an industry that has become economically unsustainable. And while that's the bad news, the good news is we've been here a whole bunch of times before. In the 40s and 50s, we re-engineered food distribution and production, and we got rid of rationing. In the 70s, we did it. In the 60s, we did it with retail. In the 70s, with manufacturing. I remember, my children ask me, what is this lane on the side of the motorway? And I tell them it's for broken cars. And they tell me, but cars never break down. Right? We all watched, in the 80s, the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And do you remember John Candy, anything he got into broke down? Right? Those of you, a lot of you are much younger than I am, so you wouldn't remember it. But that's what our manufacturing used to be like. In the 80s, we did it with financial services. When I came to Britain, you couldn't get a credit card, you couldn't convert money, you couldn't borrow money, you couldn't get a mortgage. Bad example, none of those you can do today either. In the 90s, we did it with transport and telecommunication, and it's now time to do it with our public services and healthcare in particular. So I'm very optimistic, but every time we did that, we looked at that value equation I described in here, and entrepreneurs came into those industries who fundamentally changed those value equations. And that's what we need to do in healthcare. If value is quality over price, and we define quality in healthcare as clinical outcome plus patient experience, and price as cost of delivery, just look at what we've done. In the last 10 years alone, 10 years ago, in 2010, almost 10 years ago, I remember reading that the budget of the NHS, the amount we used to spend on healthcare was £40 billion. 10 years later, that number is £120 billion. We tripled the denominator of the equation. How many of you in this room believe that clinical outcome and patient experience has gone up by threefold? Compare that with the computing industry, right? Processing power in the last 10 years has increased by 50-fold if you substitute that for quality, and the price has fallen by 2-folds. So the consumers of computing are now buying products that are 100 times better value for them. As a result, that industry is producing a lot of rich people, have very satisfied customers. When Steve Jobs died, people mourn globally. Why? As much as fat cats go, he was the fattest of them all. As much as bad bosses go, by every account, he wasn't a very nice boss. He wasn't, if you believe his biography, a very functional human being either. But he was mourned across the globe. And he was mourned for very good reason, because he solved so many of our problems by giving us devices that some of us love and like. What are we doing in our industry to do that? And before you turn back and say, well, that happens in technology because it's inherent in the power in technology, well, it's not. Again, people of my age will remember that in the 60s, 70s, 40s, 50s, a single company, IBM, was responsible for 90% of global profitability of technology. And as a result, their product, the mainframe, used to get more cumbersome and more expensive every single day, every single year, to a point that nobody could afford to buy it. In 1975, a single event happens, PC gets invented, and kids that nobody would have looked at twice, just look at the pictures of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs in 1975, went out there and used this drop-in barrier to entry from millions of dollars to thousands of dollars and invented a completely new solutions. They did what IBM could never do. But now that the barrier had fallen, Yahoo did what Microsoft could never do. Google did what Yahoo could never do. YouTube did what Google wouldn't do. Facebook, Twitter, Groupon, so on and so forth. And those who think that, yes, you can do that in technology, but you can never do it in healthcare, just look at what Aravind is doing with cataract. Look at what Dr. Shetty is doing with heart surgery. $1,400 is what he's delivering heart surgery today in Mumbai. At $1,400. And I tell you, if I had a heart problem, I'm not sure that I will not prefer him to at least 3/4 of the places in this country who did that job. Just because there's a reason they call it practice in medicine. and they get the numbers. So the task in front of us, is huge, and we're capable to doing the task. But we as a nation have a choice in front of us. We can either sit down and continue protecting the old, as we did in the 70s with manufacturing in Britain, and watch the rest of the world overtake us to a point that we don't manufacture almost anything in our country today. The other day I was saying this, and somebody raised their hand and said, actually in Midlands we manufacture the orange overalls that they wear in Guantanamo Bay. And people say we are the sixth largest manufacturer in the world, and it's true, but we don't own those manufacturing. I mean, our largest manufacturer today is Tata, an Indian company. We are one of the most productive manufacturers of cars, but we don't own any of those car companies who do it. They can change, make a decision, come out of here and go. I was the investment banker who used to sell Britain as a country to this company. And I'm telling you, they used to come here because in the 80s and 90s, we had the most flexible workforce in the Euro. But much more importantly, we were not in Euro. And people took a very important bit, which paid off, which was pound was going to depreciate against Euro. So your labor cost is going to go down, or your sales cost is going to go up. I mean, so we shouldn't get too arrogant about the fact that we got these people here, and we shouldn't think that they're going to always stay here. So the choice in front of us is, do we take healthcare, your industry, into a place where Britain can be on the podium, be a global leader? So my children, your children, those of you who have them, when they become in my age, when I had to make my future, don't look at our country and say, I better go and build my future somewhere else. I did that away from my family. It's a dreadful, dreadful thing to bring up your kids away from where the grandparents are and so on and so forth, and your families. That's our choice. And it's a very simple choice. Do we protect our old, which is unprotectable, that is never going to work, that will, it doesn't matter how much money we throw at it, the mainframes are never going to become the future of computing? Or do we keep them, but put our energy and effort before our new, and invent the new in the same way we did with telecommunication and Vodafone, or retail and Tesco, and campaign the new and make Britain a champion of the new? This country has many times chosen the right path. I hope on something as political as healthcare we do the same. Thank you so much for listening.
I think, about healthcare and where we go in this country. Questions from the audience? I'm sure there should be plenty. Everyone's stunned into silence. At the back.
David Sunny. It's just a curious question about Hinchingbrook and how is that going? And how are you introducing new ways of working? How is that changing the business of looking after people around North Cambridge?
It was David, right?
Yes.
Yeah, David. So we started, I started my career, David, as an academic. I did physics. And I was really bad at it, so I had to leave eventually after 10 years. But one thing I figured out in physics, which carried me through, was that almost everything is about, in physics, is about molecules and atoms. So you can almost explain everything if you know. So when my kids want to explain how a plane flies, they say there's the engines that make the plane go fast enough, and therefore the plane flies. And that's just not true. Because what happens is the engine makes the plane go fast enough for it to meet billions of molecules of air, who each of them will lift it a little bit. Now that I'm a manager, that lesson is as true in management as it was in physics. That the job of management is to allow each individual in a company to do their best. Unfortunately, that philosophy doesn't really work in the way we run our company. Shortly, I'm seeing a friend of mine who runs a private equity firm this afternoon, and he always argues with me that actually if I just incentivize the 3 guys on the top, everything else is fine. So all we've done in Hinchinbrook is very early days of creating an environment in which people can take ownership of their product. Paul, do you